All right, folks, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to have Easy lead today on the idea of mindfulness and compassion. Over to you, Easy.
Thank you, Shrikant. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be leading this session because I think compassion is such an important aspect of our practice and of our journey towards becoming more mindful people. And I think it's particularly important because we are so conditioned not to engage with compassionate sort of behaviors, and especially when it concerns ourselves. I mean, especially when it concerns others too, but they're one and the same. And so this week's mindfulness course talks a lot about that and how, we can't just focus on being aware of our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and of engaging in the present with this neutrality and this kind of alienation from ourselves. And it's sort of, it can seem at first glance that this can be a sterile kind of process. And what introducing compassion and friendliness in the practice does is it undoes all that conditioning, all that muck built up from years of self-judgment and other judgment, of self-doubt and self-blame. All these things we all deal with on some level, some more than others. And for all of us, it's an important part of our practice to instill a kind of warmth when we approach what's going through our minds. And then when we hold what's going through our minds, because we need to create a kind of, and I don't really like the word safe space now because it has that's already gathered a lot of sort of connotation, but we do need to create a safeness in our practice to just experience things as they come, without distance, with more intimacy, and with a kind of friendliness that really contrasts with our typical mode of dealing with our thoughts and feelings and beliefs. I'm sure a lot of you can relate with the idea that, when you do have a moment of complete friendliness and love towards yourself, where there's freedom and no judgment, it can be almost alarming. It can be so outside of our typical way of moving through our lives that it actually, until you have a moment of true compassion, awareness of what's going on in your head or what's going on in someone else's head, you don't realize how much time you really spend getting down on yourself or getting down on other people. And so putting this into the practice really can open us up to that other part of this sort of spiritual, and even if you're not religious, this is sort of you're encountering that spacious awareness in yourself. And part of that journey has to include compassion. And I think another thing that really makes this such a core part of the practice is that once you become more aware of what's going on in your mind and you become disidentified with all the happenings of life, in the sense that you're not reactive but responding, like we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, you're able to open up this space and really discover what true compassion is. Because as soon as you become disidentified from the idea of yourself, the construct of yourself, you're able to see that, the things that you believed are your fault, they're not your fault. They're just circumstances colliding. And this doesn't, kind of give you a pass, so to speak. I think a lot of people can think not only that meditation and, taking time for yourself to really get in touch with yourself, people can think it's a selfish activity. And that's another thing we need to undo also, that kind of conditioning, because doing this is not just for yourself, and it's not selfish, and it's not egocentric, because the whole point is that we're just observing what you might call the ego, and we're able to just identify it from it, so that we recognize that all of us have an ego, all of us grapple with pretty much the same issues. And you're able to move into this space when you have that quiet time, compassionate time with yourself. You're able to move into a space of true compassion. You know, it's kind of like, it's the difference between sympathy and empathy. When you move into a more full, spacious acceptance of what is. So I think that the practice of meditation, the practice of leaving time and space for yourself to just do nothing, to put aside your responsibilities, you know, your worldly responsibilities, it's the opposite of selfish. You're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing it for everyone you come into contact with. And you are nourishing a more expansive and more aware part of yourself that will allow you to have a better relationship, therefore, with yourself. And of course, that extends to other people. It's kind of an obvious jump. So yeah, I think, let me see how much time I have. I haven't put in a timer, but I want to leave space for questions and for people to have a dialogue. But I think, yeah, just those core ideas that this is an integral part of meditation practice. You know, it's implicated just in practicing itself, as I said, because you learn to disidentify, and therefore you have this open space, which is compassion for self and others. And on top of that, kind of undoing the conditioning, the years of conditioning sometimes of self-doubt, self-blame, maybe even self-hatred and self-loathing, all of that stuff, it starts to unravel. And that is really our window into, you know, a healthier relationship with ourselves and our lives and the people around us, you know, our family, our friends, future friends and future family. It really does, compassion really does have a very important role in meditation practice. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think that kind of sums it up. And now I'll open to questions. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. You can put an exclamation point just to say you want to raise your hand. Or yeah, any questions you had about any of the, if any of you did the readings or videos, you can put questions in there and about that. General life questions, because this kind of concerns life and being a human being. Anybody? Okay, cool. We got a question. Joseph, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought about with this week's readings is how do you balance, you know, understanding like your circumstances, which obviously are outside of your control, but how do you balance that with compassion for yourself? Because it's really difficult sometimes to analyze whether you're just, in one of the videos mentioned this, allowing yourself, you know, letting yourself go by saying, well, you know, that's okay that I didn't do that. You know, how do you have a kind of a nice balance between understanding your circumstances, understanding what's in your control, and then also understanding, you know, yourself?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is this kind of universal struggle between, you know, when do I let something go, and when do I try to change something in my external world, right? To
Exactly.
Recognizing that this situation is not healthy, for example, and it's harming me, you know. And I think most of us have struggled with a kind of misunderstanding of this, and we've applied compassion somewhere that that's not what it was requiring from us. So like let's say a relationship or a kind of workplace environment that it kind of, if we did engage with ourselves with compassion, we would see what course of action we needed to take. And sometimes that is doing something that appears on the outside to be cruel or callous or cold. For example, leaving a relationship or quitting somewhere. So these things, we get a mixed message basically about what's the nice thing to do, what's the appropriate thing to do. And what I say to that is like, nice isn't necessarily compassionate. And so I think it's a matter of discovering for yourself what really the right thing to do is in a situation, because you're going to get a lot of wrong answers. You're going to get a lot of people saying that was not nice of you, that was selfish of you. And like I said, just in this little overview, a lot of people actually think that, for example, going on a meditation retreat, or even dedicating, some time for yourself in the day to meditate and, go in your room by yourself or whatever, they will label that selfish. But it's kind of up to you to recognize what's feeding you, and what sometimes it's difficult because it's always a difficult question, what's feeding me, because you're going to be pulled back in, I think, to sometimes unhealthy situations. And it's a matter of, and I think the self-compassion thing really can help you cultivate a trust in yourself and what you need to do in a situation, regardless of how other people are going to interpret it. I don't know if that, I'm just another person here, like, I think ultimately the answer is in you, but that's kind of my take. Yeah. So Jim, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah. So the question is, do you think self-compassion and self-acceptance is a prerequisite to other people compassion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
Now, the reason I'm asking that is because it seems to me self-acceptance is kind of a lifelong challenge and journey as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, you have to try to do both all the time. And maybe you'll be more effective at the latter if you can master the first one. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to delay being compassionate to others until you figure it yourself out necessarily either, right?
Yeah, I think self-compassion is not necessarily a prerequisite, but it's completely interwoven with other compassion. Like you learn self-compassion by having compassion for others and vice versa. But yeah, as far as cultivating a kind of compassionate relationship with yourself, I think in a way you could consider that paramount, because you're the only one here, you're the only one in this, in this reality. So in order to, and all your relationships with others really come back to you, because it's this interaction between you and the world. And we all have that. We all have that kind of, it can be maybe an isolating experience, but it's also what binds us to the universal, because we all have this completely unique, completely distinct and separate subjective reality. And you could kind of observe that and see, okay, well, what this reality is, and this is, talked about through the centuries and, all the time, but, and it can be a cliche, but, your reality shapes, or the way that you respond to your reality shapes it. So if you're down on yourself and you're hating yourself and you feel alone, that's a symptom of something, and it's I think a way to cultivate the undoing of that kind of harmful attitude is to be mindful and instill, because we all need to do the work to kind of instill compassion for ourselves, and then that always, I think, always extends to other people in our lives. You know, it's just, so yeah, I think it is, they're definitely interwoven, and they depend on each other for sure.
And I think if there's a point in there too, I just want to add is, you know, self-compassion doesn't mean enlightened. It just means you accept who you are, even with your flaws.
Right. And I think you pointed out, like, you know, it's a back and forth. It's a kind of, you know, you're never going to be perfectly ready to deal with other people or even deal with yourself. I mean, there's no such thing as that. It's just, you know, that's not really attainable. And you know, it's kind of like that story of the master of patience. You know, he's in a cave and he's mastered the art of patience, and somebody comes along, and I'm paraphrasing and obviously putting this into my own words, but the story of the master of patience, he's mastered patience, he's, you know, the most pure and restful and able to deal with anything that comes his way. And then he's been in this cave for, you know, years and years and years, mastering this art, and somebody comes in and you know, starts pestering him, like, you're just doing this for the money or for the recognition, right? You know, he starts challenging him, you know, challenging his patience, and he blows up, and he's like, you don't understand. So the whole idea is that, you know, you can be in this quiet room, you know, you can be away, and you can think that you've reached some sort of, you know, awareness that's deeper, and then somebody comes along and challenges that, and you know, you react, and that's just, you know, that's just life. So I guess the art is, you know, being able to be here and then not be out there and have some sense of balance, whatever that means for each of us. So yeah, moving on. Thank you for that question. Tanya, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes.
Okay, so thank you for the discussion and for your insights and explanation on compassion. I found it really interesting because there's just so many different perspectives all in one. And you made it completely, I think you made great points regarding, you know, the perspective on what compassion really means, you know, and sort of a reflection, or at least is what I got. I'm just paraphrasing of maybe what I understood, of we're reflections of the people outside of us in many ways, because we deal, you know, we have our own sort of path to what we perceive as good, you know, and you know, while some people can say, well, you know, it's not fair that you know, have the time to meditate, which I am pretty sure that sounds really awful, but I mean, there are people out there that do see having you time or like me time as something like kind of selfish, which is funny because it's really kind of like calling what was that word? It's kind of being like a hypocrite, right, in a way. But going back to the discussion with all the readings and videos and material provided, you know, and from what I know, you know, it really boils down to how we want to live our lives, you know, and what we value. Everyone values, you know, everybody.
Yeah.
So, you know, for us to have a grip and understand that not everyone will be on the same page and okay with that. I think the whole process of letting go and understanding that we're not of other people. And I would predict myself in a way because I believe that we create our reality. We create, but then it's like we can control that. So in a way, we can't really control what Susan will wear tomorrow. Just to be like a little too specific there, but we can control how we want to interact with her and whether or not it's on the level of high vibration or low vibration. I know this might be getting into like a little bit more of the energy and how that works.
No, you make a good.
I'm sorry?
Everyone's on their own path, and I think that recognizing that is a core element of compassion. Is that everyone's just where they're at, and once you recognize that in yourself, you can recognize that in others and hold space for that. So thank you, Tanya, for your thoughts.
And it kind of tells you. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. And now John Crockett, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about the sort of self-compassion versus other people compassion. It's sort of like a chicken and egg thing. I think the way it manifests usually is that people tend to see it as okay to be compassionate towards others or care for other people, and they still see themselves as a martyr or something along those lines, or they think they're going to fix themselves by being sort of caring towards others. And there's sort of like a fallacy in that, because often what happens is that because they haven't like experienced sort of self-care innately or self-compassion, they sort of don't know how to express it properly towards other people. And so they do things, it's almost like trying to drive with the windshield all mucked up, and they often cause a lot more harm. And if you look at someone like even if you think about it writ large, like some of the most terrible things in human history, and I won't go into them, but like are people who are
colonialism.
Yeah, like
I have something to offer you. Let me help you.
Yeah, it's always under the guise of and in some cases, right, there are people who are like let's just say not good people that are like manipulating, but there's many of these people are just sort of drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're deluded, and they sort of can believe that they're doing the compassionate thing. And so because they're deluded, so I think there's a peril, because like delusion combined with compassionate intent is disaster. So because the thing about compassion is it doesn't necessarily always mean doing the nice thing, right?
Exactly.
Like, so there's definitely like a balance. I feel like that you don't want to be too compassionate towards yourself without being compassionate with other people, because I guess that's narcissism or something. But you definitely don't want to be too compassionate towards others without being compassionate, because like I guess at the end of the day, compassion is basically being part of one like shared experience fundamentally.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly the reason why I like to make that distinction of like nice versus compassionate, and the two aren't the same. Like, and so people can think, well, you're practicing self-compassion. What are you, a narcissist? Compassion, it does not have to do with the self. So it's intrinsically not a narcissistic, I don't know what you would call compassion. I guess it's I think it's a practice and a process. So yeah, I think people have a kind of misconception of compassion, because we do have a society that, is built on misdirected niceness, all the evil things we see have come out of this effort to control other people and to control them into doing what we want them to do. And that can take the form of somebody who's like a giver, a chronic giver, somebody who's like, you know, well, like, listen, this worked for me, and, you know, I'm going to try to get you on this, you know, program that I went on that worked for me, and it's fantastic, and you got to do this. And that's even putting it in nice language. I think some people even will force others in a not so pleasant way to adopt their way of life. And, you know, that's just, it should be called what it is. It's control, and it's, it's misdirection. It often shows up in, you know, in the blanket, in the umbrella, under the umbrella of, I'm being nice. I'm just being nice, you know? So I totally agree with you there. I think it's important to make that distinction. Because self-compassion, other compassion, it does not have to do with self and other and, you know, the constructions of ourselves that can be, you know, manipulated, controlled, whatever. It's just, I just see it as just expansive awareness and really confronting reality. That's compassionate, not trying to control reality. So yeah, I'm with you there. Thanks for adding that. Jeff, go ahead.
So, Izzy, I have to tell you, I'm really impressed with this idea, this orientation to compassion, as an embracing reality and sort of realizing that we're all connected, but it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, doing things that externally might look nice. It doesn't mean that we won't necessarily hold in ourselves a place where we're not exercising love for the other person. But I put in this that I was going to ask this question a couple people ago, but I still want to say it again just because it's so, you know, among the things that I do is coach people who are in pretty responsible positions. And I was coaching this one young person in a senior leadership role. And without going into the story of it, it was pretty clear that she was going to need to let go of this one very senior staff person because he was kind of making life miserable for everybody, including her. And she'd done everything she could to help him and give him options and given him coaching in order to help him do better. But he didn't want to do better. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. And so the time had come to let him go, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. And so we had to just talk about it in terms of, you know, not only what was the compassionate thing for her, and not only was the compassionate thing for the rest of the leadership team, every single person of whom had come to her individually to say, you have got to fire this person. But also in the end, even the right and therefore compassionate thing for the person that she was going to fire. That this situation was not good for them either, and that in order for them to learn whatever they needed to learn, as well as stop inflicting their behavior on others, that the compassionate thing, even though it wouldn't seem nice to that person or anybody who is a friend of theirs, the compassionate thing to do even for that person was to let them go. Is that a little bit what you're talking about here?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And extending that kind of concept of nice does not equal compassionate. And I think it's really important to undo that kind of conditioning. Because it traps us in all sorts of really messed up situations, you know. It traps us in abusive systems too, because, you know, things are under the guise of this is the best way for you. Or even, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of personal things too I think about, like relationships I've had that I've had to cut off with people who, you know, on the outside are very nice and you know, complimentary, you know. It doesn't mean, and these relationships that I had, you know, involved a lot of control on their part. And I think often niceness is used as a mode of controlling other people. And so therefore, I think it's important to make that distinction. Compassion does not equal nice. And, that's a pretty, what you shared, I think that's a story everyone can relate to, that there's
Maybe that could be the title of your next book, compassion does not equal nice.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it's an important one. I really believe that. So thank you, Jeff. Who's next? I agree. Okay, Noelle, go ahead.
Izzy, thanks for the synopsis. It was nice and clear. I guess I'm intrigued as I'm reading through the sessions, and I know that you guys didn't design the course, but the interpersonal things are week 6, week 7, like it's towards the end of the course. Does that mean as people are learning meditation, if we're introducing others to it, that you've got to build a base within yourself before you can really begin to turn and look outwards? Like, is there a philosophical bent that's actually being shown here by the progression of the interpersonal things coming later in the sessions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think every kind of course where people design to have a reflection of sort of the philosophy behind it, or the culture behind it. So perhaps, that it's the idea that you need to go and then come back, in a way. Go into yourself and then come back. I think that is that is valuable, because I think a lot of most of our issues and our suffering has to do with I guess our contact with the external world, the outside, others, other people. And maybe because it's actually maybe the most difficult that they put it near the end, because like I said before, that story of the master of patience in his cave, and then someone comes along and kind of just, challenges him and wrecks it all in his mind. It's that idea that, you can have this quiet room and be good and be, enlightened, but as soon as you bring other people into it, it's a little more hairy, I guess. So I would assume they would introduce that later, because, you need a little, okay, this is for you, and you kind of getting into this as an individual practice, and then let's reintegrate you into, okay, what's the real world here, and how can this be applied to the real world, and not just, when you're out in nature, sitting somewhere alone. So yeah, I don't know if that answers anything or contributes anything, but that's my thought.
Thank you. And the supplementary to that, I was interested by the references to narcissism. I've been reading a lot about narcissism lately. And there's a woman called Melanie Tomia Evans who does a lot of work in this. And her thing is people who get caught by narcissists have to go back into themselves and sort out their issues as to why they get snagged by narcissists. So it's very much kind of like the meditation train we're on right now. You have to go center in yourself in order to be dealing with each other. So I found it interesting that the two were paralleling each other right now.
Yeah, that is interesting. And on top of that, I think our discussion about nice versus compassionate has very much to do with that idea of narcissism and dealing with, abusive systems and abusive relationships. I think the narcissists, I think both people on both ends are engaging in this sort of, it's sort of a game that's hovering over, but never really reaching the core of each person. And it has a lot to do with, being nice. I think a lot of people get stuck in that because they're conditioned to just be nice and allow somebody to abuse them. And you find, and when you investigate that, you realize that that's not, that letting someone kind of mow over you is not the compassionate or nice thing to do. In fact, it's harmful to everybody. So it's interesting that it all relates. It all,
Thank you.
It's all very relevant. All right, thanks, Noel. And let's see, Crystal, do you have a question, or was just adding that idea of altruism? Crystal, are you there? All right. Oh, no.
I guess you muted me again.
Yeah,
Okay. You were just looking for the opposite word of narcissistic, and I suggested that as an antonym.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but I guess I could share my thoughts. I don't know if you're familiar with Christian Neff.
Say it again.
She's a psychologist who really has been really important in the development of the concept of self-compassion as a therapeutic practice. And yeah, she's written a few books about it. She's a Buddhist as well. Right. And yeah, so she talks about like there's not necessarily, people can be very compassionate to each other and to other people and unkind towards themselves. But I think, so it's not like it's not necessarily, that they have to come in tandem. But, I was thinking about, as my mother is a good example, actually, that she'd go over to my brother and his wife's place and clean, but she'd go through like their drawers and and just really kind of snooping a little bit too much and making and my mom is a great self-sacrificer, and she's never announces it, but she likes it to make it quite clear, that she has done something. So that's one example of kind of a manipulation with apparent compassion, and also the fact that judgment, right? Like we most judge other people who seem to demonstrate something that we don't like in ourselves, and so that can often be the case, that there could be no peace with the world until we find peace with ourselves. So yeah, I just wanted to, as you were talking anyway, I was thinking it's perhaps more nuanced, but some people are very empathetic and just naturally empathetic and can't really help but feel for other people, even if they don't feel particularly good about themselves. It could be hard to stand up for themselves, but for someone else it's almost automatic. So yeah, anyway, just my reflections. But no, I didn't have a question, but that's what I was.
Well, thanks.
Those are my ruminations. Thanks.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, the idea that we're constantly projecting, all of us. That's just, and I guess removing ourselves or observing the projections is the real window into transformation. Yeah, thanks for that. Last, I'm going to wrap it up soon. So last question from Brian.
I get into a lot of issues with soul suckers. This conversation's reminded me of that. And so, I don't know, I'd like some input on at what point do you cut it off with them? At what point does your gas tank run empty with compassion?
I relate too much with this, honestly. That's why I'm laughing so much. I think the honest answer is it ends when it ends. It ends when your gas tank is empty. But I think as far as like having a pattern where you're getting into relationships where you're giving too much and receiving too little, this kind of pattern, it's kind of like an alert. Like, all right, take a step back. I need to reflect on what tendencies that I have that are making me, that are attracting me and attracting others like this. to a relationship here. And, you know, that's where I think, like, accountability comes in. And when you apply compassion with that, it's not a matter of shame or guilt, but of, because I think those kind of, what you're describing, soul-sucking relationships, they involve a lot of guilt, a lot of guilting. And, you know, just take over. And I think stepping back and noticing what in you, I mean, this sounds almost like victim blamey, but I don't know, I think it's empowering to just step back and decide to look at what tendencies are kind of creating this pattern. But to answer your question, I think, like, when do you know when to give something up? I think it's a matter of, we always know right at the beginning, you know. I think everyone can relate to that too. You know, by the end, we were like, oh, this is just confirming what I knew at the very start, and now I'm finally listening to myself. So that's where I think mindfulness comes in, and compassion comes in, because it's a matter of cultivating enough awareness that you are able to basically receive what kind of messages your body and your mind, you know, if you're more spiritual, your soul, are telling you about a situation. And I guess I think mindfulness really does help you catch it earlier, because you're just more in tune with yourself. But yeah, as far as like when do you decide to let go or to cut someone off or end a relationship or enforce boundaries in a relationship, this practice just, I think, automatically applies to that, because with self-compassion, you're better able to create boundaries without fear of hurting someone's feelings, and you're better able to notice red flags, and notice your own tendencies that keep you there. So yeah, that would be my answer. Just
I think with the chicken and the egg question, I feel like it's the egg, it's yourself, because at some point you're gonna have to put yourself first. Because if they're overwhelming, you know, they're the ones that have to go, and you're the one that has to stay. So it's especially difficult with family members and coworkers, people you have to deal with on the regular basis, and that's when it's toughest. But at some point, you got to put yourself first, is my argument.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes with compassion, you know, putting yourself first in that kind of, if you want to frame it that way, putting yourself first is actually often compassionate towards others too. Like I said earlier, you know, practicing mindfulness is not just a practice of selfishness or self-care with that connotation of you're narcissistic, you love yourself. It's about everybody. It's about, you know, humanity, and it's and I like that we talk extensively about that distinction between nice and compassionate, because it's probably the most pressing kind of delusion we take part in pretty frequently. I mean, you see abusive structures everywhere, and systems that are telling you one thing but doing another, you know. And I think compassionate is a matter of facing the reality, and that's pretty much it. It could just be distilled into that: facing reality. That's compassion. So yeah, all right. So thank you everybody for your questions and for engaging in the discussion. Thank you, Tanya. You're putting a lot of wisdom into the chat. Thank you. And so I'm gonna read you guys a poem to set the stage for the meditation that I'm gonna do for you guys. And this week we have another Mary Oliver poem, because there's a lot of gems there. And this one's called The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. That was The Journey by Mary Oliver. I can put it in the chat. Let's see. Hope it fits. So relevant. Okay. All right, so I'm going to lead you guys in a little guided meditation. If you prefer doing your own unguided practice, just obviously go ahead and mute. It should be, maybe 10 minutes or so. So everyone settle in, wherever you are in the world. Everyone can hear me all right? I mean, I should have asked that like an hour ago, but all right. So close your eyes, settle into your body. You can do a little body scan. Maybe working your way up from the feet, gently taking note of what sensations are happening right now. So for this meditation, I want to engage your imaginations and your memories a little. So this isn't one where you're going to be coming back to the breath always, because I'll be leading you through a scenario. But before we come to that, check in with your breath, your body, any immediate sensations. You can open your eyes briefly, ground yourself in where you are, taking note of your surroundings, the objects supporting you and surrounding you. Notice their solidity and yours in space. Okay, now close your eyes again. Now I want you to bring to mind a mirror that you use the most frequently. So whether it's in your bedroom or the bathroom, the hall, maybe it's a pocket mirror that you keep in a drawer, maybe it's your phone even. So some mirror that you use. Assuming that you all have a mirror somewhere that you use, I want you to imagine yourself looking into it. So eyes closed, picture yourself in the mirror. So you're looking at yourself. And I want you to bring to mind what I'm going to call your mirror rituals. So where do your eyes move first? Is it the lines in your face? Are you thinking, oh, that one's getting a little deeper? Are you scanning for blemishes, maybe stray hairs? Do your eyes jump to a feature that you imagine to be substandard? Maybe you're neutral. Maybe use the mirror just for, finding things in your teeth, checking for cleanliness. So I want you to just notice and gently label what thoughts arise when you're staring back at yourself. And this is an imaginary version of yourself in the mirror, but you can draw on memory because you maybe check yourself a few times a day, or even if it's only once. This is part of your routine. So yeah, just gently label what thoughts arise. Do you muse about how others see you, what they might be thinking when they look at you? So make some room for whatever arises as you're creating this vivid picture of you in the mirror. What feelings are coming up? Okay, now forget about the mirror for a second and call to mind the feeling you get when you see the smile of someone you love or even just enjoy, or someone you admire. That same kind of warmth that comes from that. So let that overtake you. See if you can reside in that space. Now back to the mirror. In your mind's eye, just see that reflection of you smiling. Notice how the eyes squint, how your features change a little. Feel the friendliness of this person and just enjoy the peace that's coming from their well-meaning presence. So this imaginary mirror, it's an unusual sort of mirror. So you're looking at yourself right now, right? Now your reflection turns away from you and looks at something else. So you're still watching this person, but they've noticed something else in the room and they've taken their eyes off of you. You know that they're still aware of you sitting there, but have relaxed enough to look around at your shared surroundings. You can study their features, like you have many times before, in passing, while brushing your teeth. But now envision that you have a chance to look at this person without the gaze returned. So you're free now to look without feeling judged or feeling judgmental. It's the way you'd watch a child taking in the world. Now imagine this person in the mirror is laughing. Imagine again the warmth that a loved one's laugh brings you. And just enjoy your reflections laughing that very same way. What does that feel like? Just notice the beauty there. Notice the purity. Notice the vulnerability, the freedom in their joy. We've all encountered the freedom in a moment of unself-conscious observing like this. So we mostly get to have that freedom where it concerns other people. Rarely do we take the time to appreciate that we too are people with much about us to love and rejoice in. So look at yourself as you would a friend, with that same generous recognition of the things about them that are likable and attractive. Now you can let this little scenario dissolve, but pay attention to what feelings are coming up for you or came up for you during this. You might notice resistance, maybe alarm, maybe a feeling of foreignness or strangeness. Maybe you felt inspired or renewed. Taking the time to notice and appreciate ourselves as human beings is no small thing. The relationship you have with yourself is the most intimate and most important relationship you will ever have. So now we can take a few silent moments to spend some time with this person that you are, giving our full attention and inviting any thoughts or emotions in with friendliness. All right, everybody. Open your eyes. If you can't, will help us with the breakout rooms. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Izzy. It's wonderful. Folks, I'm going to start the breakout rooms for 25 minutes, and then we'll come back here and share our takeaways.